Chapter 126, Unquenched Hunger. After setting everything up, he called up his men. Then, let's start testing these two items now. Norman Osborn's tone carried a trace of excitement and madness. You have to know. Tomorrow is the date for the military inspection. So, this experiment cannot be failed. As he spoke, he turned around and looked at the researcher beside him. Let's start with Amazon's armband. Norman Osborn muttered. Yes. As for the group of scientists at the side, they seemed to be somewhat submissive. After all, the last batch of people who dared to oppose him will become experimental subjects. These guys immediately pressed the button. In front of them was a huge empty laboratory. There was nothing inside. Then, a fixed cabin rose from the ground. The cabin slowly rose up. An experimental body was fixed within it. It was struggling crazily. This fellow was in the same batch as that cheetah. A mechanical arm stretched out from above. The completed Amazon armband was embedded in that guy's arm. Arg! As the armband pierced through, this fellow let out a crazed howl. All right, release it. Norman Osborn clasped his hands together and ordered. The researcher beside him immediately unlocked the lock of the fixed cabin. Crack! Following the opening of the fixed cabin, the experimental subject immediately jumped out. The current him. He still maintained his human form. But, for many days, hunger was with him. It was already unbearable for him. Put some food in. Norman Osborn issued another order. Immediately, several holes appeared in the laboratory. The mechanical arm took out several foods. The experimental body looked at the food in front of him greedily. He grabbed one of the hamburger bags and tasted it. Then he spat it out. Then, he took a few more human foods. However, he couldn't swallow it at all. Finally, he looked at a raw egg. He saw this guy pick up the raw egg. He greedily sniffed it a few times and then broke it. Then, he opened the eggshell and opened his big mouth. He let the egg fluid inside continuously drip into his mouth. In less than a moment, this raw egg was swallowed entirely. Even the eggshell was licked several times. But it was very obvious. Such a small amount. It was not enough to satisfy his appetite. Instead, it aroused his appetite even more. Not enough. Not enough. Anything else? Hurry up and send it to me. The experimental subject knocked on the glass of the experimental room. He roared madly. At this moment, he urgently needed protein to replenish himself. And according to the equipment, it was displayed. The activated cells in his body were also surging crazily. Now, send Connors and Amazon's belt in together. Norman Osborn loosened his tie. He said. This. The researcher beside him did not seem to be in good condition. What? You are not willing? Then how about we throw you in? Norman Osborn sneered. The researcher trembled in fear. He did not dare to hesitate. He hurriedly opened the button. And at this time, on the ground, another cabin rose. And the one inside was no one else. It was the previous Dr. Connors. He had also been injected with Amazon cell. But, because the injection time was relatively late, at this time, Dr. Connors did not feel hungry. So, when he was released, he seemed very calm. As for the other mechanical arm, it placed the developed Amazon belt in front of him. It was placed in front of him. Is this the Amazon belt that you developed? Dr. Connors raised his hand. He picked up Amazon's belt and examined it carefully. He appeared calm and collected. However, the experimental subject next to him was different. He felt like he was about to go crazy from hunger. Food. Give me food. He lay on the ground and roared in a low voice. The armband on his arm gave off a series of notifications. Immediately after, he raised his head and instantly locked his gaze onto Dr. Connors. Streams of saliva flowed out from his mouth. Black lines also appeared on his neck. "Si la la." Along with the surging of a burst of steam, this experimental subject immediately completed the transformation to Amazon. He was now empowered. Although he still maintained his human form. However, his body was more than twice as large as before. Behind him, there was a long black tail. It emerged from between the legs. It looked extremely terrifying. A lizard Amazon appeared in front of everyone. Speaking of which, Chapter 127, Alpha Transformation. You have to know. This Dr. Connors, in the original work. Because he was injected with the genetic medicine he developed, he became lizard. From then on, he became one of Spider-Man's enemies. But now, the experimental subjects, on the other side, obtained this title. But the experimental subjects on the other side had obtained it first. He had long since been the Green Man. It had to be said that it was a type of irony. As for the lizard Amazon on the other side, it was also completed his transformation. He was like a giant humanoid lizard. He suddenly opened his eyes. The snake-like pupils quickly locked onto Dr. Connors. Roar! He roared with a frightening tone. Then, Jin quickly charged toward Dr. Connors. As for this Dr. Connors, his face revealed a trace of panic. As the person in charge of the experiment, he naturally knew what that fellow wanted to do. Thus, he turned around and wanted to run into the distance. But he had just been released. His body was in a very weak state. He accidentally fell to the ground. The lizard Amazon on the other side also followed closely behind. A huge shadow instantly covered down. It completely enveloped Dr. Connors. Some saliva directly fell from above. It dripped on Dr. Connors' face. Immediately after, a thick black tail suddenly swept up from behind. With a swoosh, it wrapped around Dr. Connors' neck. Then, it was like carrying a chicken. He picked him up from the ground. Immediately after, Dr. Connors' face met with the lizard Amazon's face. Their eyes met. Dr. Connors' pupils trembled. His eyes were filled with regret and fear. If he didn't give this Amazon cell to Norman Osborn, he was afraid that this situation would not have happened today. As for the lizard Amazon, his eyes were filled with greed and excitement. Greed was naturally the desire for meat. The reason he was excited was that he had already recognized his meal. The guy in front of him was the one who was responsible for experimenting with them. Unexpectedly, this fellow had actually fallen to the point of becoming an experimental subject. Since that was the case, then there was no need for him to rush to eat him. He has to torture him properly. Thinking of this, this lizard Amazon's long and narrow mouth instantly split open. It revealed its sharp teeth. The snake-like tongue was spat out. It licked Dr. Connors' face. Immediately, he tightened his tail. Dr. Connors instantly felt as if he was being strangled to the point of being unable to breathe. His entire person was in midair, struggling crazily. However, he was unable to escape at all. It seems that I can only try using that thing. Dr. Connors gritted his teeth and thought with difficulty. As the main person in charge of the experiment, he naturally knew the effects of Amazon cell and driver in his hands. But knowing was still knowing. He did not dare to try rashly. After all, once the cells were catalyzed, no one knew what would happen. Unexpectedly, the first experiment was actually himself. Speaking of which, it was really ironic. Dr. Connors' eyes were red. With great difficulty, he held driver in his hand and placed it on his waist. Crack! The belt automatically tightened in an instant. Then, the doctor twisted the handle of the driver. Alpha! Along with the prompt of the belt, the green eyes on the belt suddenly lit up. Immediately, the interior immediately started to operate. One after another, it stabbed into Dr. Connors' abdomen. The medicine that stimulated Amazon to become alive was immediately injected. Amazon cells in his body quickly became alive. He began to devour normal cells in his surroundings. As for Dr. Connors, his entire body felt like being torn apart. Arg! He opened his mouth and shouted in pain. Oh! On the other side, the lizard Amazon clearly did not know what was happening on the other side. He tilted his head. He thought the other party had been strangled too tightly by him and was about to die. Since that was the case, he should give him an arm and treat it as a dessert. Otherwise, wait a moment. If his guy is dead, he won't taste good. Thinking of this, the lizard Amazon raised his claws. He was prepared to tear off one of Dr. Connors' arms. However, at this moment, Dr. Connors, who was facing him, raised his head again. There was no longer the fear in his eyes. What remained was the desire to kill. Even the lizard Amazon couldn't help but be stunned when he saw it. But, before it could react, only to see Dr. Connors say 3 words in a low voice. Ma. Zon. Along with this voice, his body suddenly exploded. A terrifying flame started with him. It spread out in all directions. This power was no weaker than a small bomb. As for the lizard Amazon, he couldn't dodge in time. Chapter 128, Alpha's Rage. The tail that wrapped around Dr. Connors instantly exploded. The blood that erupted from it scattered in all directions. The terrifying explosion also blasted away the huge body. It was directly sent flying. It was like a broken sack. It directly smashed into the snow-white wall 30 meters behind him. With a bang, the hard laboratory wall was directly smashed out with blood. Fortunately, this wall was built to be hard enough. Otherwise, there would be a good-sized crack on it. It can't be directly pierced through. As for the staff outside the laboratory, they saw such a dazzling red light. They instinctively raised their hands to block in front of themselves. They were deeply afraid that their eyes would be hurt. Only Osborne seemed to be looking at some rare treasure. They widened their eyes, not wanting to miss a single detail. That's right. This is the power. When Norman Osborne saw the red light that exploded out, his face was filled with a dazed expression. He muttered to himself. A moment later, the flames stopped. Only then did everyone put down their hands. They looked in the direction of the flames. It was only then that a sinister monster figure appeared in front of everyone. The monster's entire body was crimson red, like blood and flames. Moreover, there were many wounds on its body. It looked extremely oppressive. His body also did not have any metallic luster. Only his wrist, a blade, shone with a faint dark light. Kamen Rider Alpha. This was the existence behind Dr. Connors's transformation. Many of the scientists widened their eyes. They looked at Kamen Rider Alpha in front of them. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. This type of Amazon was completely different from what they had seen before. Could it be? This was Amazon's true form? Norman Osborne couldn't help but feel excited at this moment. He directly stuck to the reinforced glass of the laboratory. His eyes were excited when he saw that transformation had become Kamen Rider. And at this time, the lizard Amazon who had been sent flying didn't notice the danger at all. It crawled up from the ground. The tail that had just been shattered was quickly regenerated. For Amazon, as long as they had not been fatally injured, their parts of the body could still be restored. Seeing that Dr. Connors, who was still eating delicious food just now, had suddenly turned into this strange thing. In his heart, he was naturally furious. Immediately, it roared and pounced towards the red monster. Come on! Let me see who is stronger. Norman Osborne, who was in front of the glass, gritted his teeth and said. In the laboratory. It didn't take long for the lizard Amazon to arrive in front of the red monster. It waved its claws and swung its head. However, at this moment, the red monster. However, he did not give in at all. He also suddenly raised his dark wrist blade. He waved it upwards. Two sounds. Two streams of black blood began to swell. That lizard Amazon's hard skin had been directly cut apart by that wrist blade. Fresh blood flowed out. The lizard Amazon couldn't help but take a few steps back in pain. However, he was not willing to fail. Thus, it swung its tail like a whip and lashed at the fellow, trying to cause damage to it. However, facing the incoming tail, the red monster raised its hand. He pulled him back. What? The lizard Amazon wanted to pull his tail away. But the red monster's claws were deeply embedded in it. It made it unable to move. Then next, I'll let you experience the pain I felt just now. As he spoke, he raised his arm. It was as if he was swinging a sledgehammer. He pulled the lizard Amazon's tail and smashed it into the ground. Bang! 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 Each blow was like a heavy hammer. It smashed into the hearts of the surrounding laboratory staff. The ground was covered in black and red blood. In less than an instant, the lizard Amazon was covered in wounds. He was lying in a pool of blood, no longer as domineering as before. However, at this time, the red monster seemed to be unwilling to let go. One foot stepped on the lizard Amazon. The other hand ruthlessly pulled. With a piercing sound, the tail was immediately torn apart. Immediately after, it stretched out another claw. It stabbed into the lizard Amazon's body. When the claw was raised again, a dark heart appeared in his hand. The heart kept jumping. It emitted a red and black light. This red monster crushed one of them, killing this lizard Amazon. This red monster suddenly turned its head around. His scarlet eyes stared at the people outside the laboratory. It made one's heart tighten. Not good. This guy wants to escape. Quickly activate all the protective measures in this laboratory. At this moment, Norman Osborn seemed to wake up from a dream. He frantically reminded the staff members. As for the staff members who were watching from all sides, they hurriedly pressed a protective button. Chapter 129, Osborn's Sickness. At this time, the red monster in the laboratory also moved. His right foot suddenly stepped out. Bang! A small hole appeared in the ground. His body suddenly flew up and he kicked. Then, he flew towards the glass layer of the laboratory. Kaka! Only for a moment. The super reinforced glass inside the laboratory shattered forcefully. One had to know. The strength of this glass was extremely terrifying. Not to mention bullets. Even some small bombs were unable to blast it apart. However, the red monster in front of him easily broke apart. Fortunately, in order to ensure safety, the laboratory had 2 layers of safety glass. And at this time, white mist surged out from within the laboratory. This white mist instantly enveloped the laboratory. The situation inside was unclear. This white mist was an anesthetic. 1 milliliter was enough to knock the elephant unconscious. And just now, they had released 5 liters. The staff relaxed a little. Who knew that the next second? Boom! The outer glass actually shattered. A red figure flew out from within. The glass scattered everywhere. A few just happened to shot at Norman Osborn's body. Blood flowed out. As for the red demon, after breaking out of the cage, its body was a bit unstable. After all, he had also absorbed a large amount of anesthetic. He staggered over to Norman Osborn. He raised his arm, wanting to kill him. Who knew? This Osborn took out something with his mouth, trembling. Then, he suddenly pressed it down. A terrifying electric current instantly spread out from his belt. "Si la la." The red monster's body immediately froze on the spot. The transformation was instantly removed. It revealed Dr. Connor's true body. The belt also fell off his body. He fell to the ground. Dr. Connors fell to the ground, twitched twice, and fainted. On the other side, Norman Osborn laughed wildly. "Ha ha ha! You didn't expect it, did you?" As the developer of Amazon's belt, he naturally held back. Unexpectedly, it worked at this time. But in the next second, a mouthful of blood came out of his mouth. It turned out, the 2 glass shards just now had already pierced into his heart and lungs. The surrounding staff quickly came up for treatment. Then, he took out the 2 glass pieces from his body. Moreover, he used the medical equipment around him to conduct a check. Who knew? It didn't matter if they didn't check it out. When they checked, they found out. This Norman Osborn's body was already in tatters. Many of his organs were already on the verge of failing. As for Norman Osborn, he was lying on the experimental bed. His face was as white as paper, and his breath was like gossamer. Quickly give that Amazon cell a shot as well." Norman Osborn panted heavily. In fact, the reason for all these years, he had been pushing forward the plan to strengthen his body. He was willing to invest a lot of money. He even tricked the military into joining them. It wasn't that he wanted humans to evolve. Rather, it was because his Osborn family had always had a rare hereditary illness. This hereditary disease was extremely difficult to cure. So, the people of the Osborn family rarely lived past the age of 45. This was because once one reached this age, they would be able to reach the peak of their cultivation. Their skin would collapse. The organs will also become failing. In the end, they will die in pain. As for Norman Osborn, when he was very young, he had personally witnessed the death of his elder. Thus, he swore to himself that he would change the fate of his family. He would remove this curse. That was why he created Osborn Industries. Starting from medicine. Hopefully, it would be able to cure this disease of his. However, after some research, they discovered that the genes of their family were born with flaws. There was no way to cure it with medicine. The only way was to strengthen one's physique. This way, one could resist the effects of genetic defects. So, for so many years. That was why Norman Osborn was always thinking about it. He was obsessed with the human body plan. For this, he did not hesitate to mobilize a large number of researchers. He spent a huge amount of money. It was all for the sake of freeing his family from this curse. And now, this opportunity had come. Although this Amazon cell had a lot of side effects. But Norman believed that his own company would definitely conquer it. So, he had originally planned to, after passing the military examination, he began to treat himself. But in this situation, he had no choice but to inject it in advance. This Norman Osborn was lying on the stretcher. He was carried to the front of Amazon Cell's injection machine. After a period of experimentation, he was finally able to see the results for himself. Chapter 130, Birth of the Green Goblin. The remaining scientists found out. This Amazon cell was used in combination with anesthesia, fog and injection. It was easier to get an individual alive. So, the improved Amazon cell injection machine was much bigger. The innermost part was a fixed frame. The outer circle was a misty-made glass cover. As for the surrounding scientists, they took out 4 tubes of Amazon cell solvent. Not enough. Give me a little more. Norman Osborn shouted at the researcher beside him. In his eyes, this Amazon cell had already become an omnipotent existence. He would definitely be able to cure his genetic illness. Therefore, the more, the better. The researcher had no choice but to increase the dosage. From the previous 4 bottles, it was changed to 10 bottles. Come on. Norman Osborn laid down in the innermost cabin and ordered. BZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZZ The gas quickly filled the entire glass container. It completely covered Norman Osborn. People couldn't see the situation inside at all. The surrounding staff members. They could only look at the data on the medical instruments beside them. Determine the state of Norman at this time. However, at this time, from within the thick fog came the screams of Norman Osborn. That Amazon cell was constantly tearing and recombining with the genes in his body. And on the apparatus, his heartbeat also spiked up to 188. In the end, there was a straight line. Oh, my God! A researcher on the side could not help but exclaim when he saw this. He quickly turned off the power. And at this time, the thick fog surrounding Amazon also gradually dispersed. Norman Osborn was lying there motionlessly. It was as if he wasn't breathing. A researcher opened the equipment. He walked in and wanted to check it out. However, at this moment, this Norman Osborn suddenly opened his eyes. A green light lit up his eyes. It was filled with endless tyranny. He raised his hand and broke free from the shackles that bound him. Then he raised his hand, grabbed the experimental subject by the neck, and threw him out ruthlessly. There was a boom. The glass cabin exploded. And Norman Osborn also jumped out. His expression was ferocious. The surrounding experimental subjects were frightened and fled in all directions. But fortunately, this state did not last long. The green in the eyes of Norman Osborn gradually dissipated. Just now, this Amazon cell and the genes in his body had produced an inconceivable resonance phenomenon. It caused his body to undergo an extremely miraculous transformation. It even gave birth to another personality of his. Green Goblin personality. Mr. Norman. Are you all right? Some of the researchers hid behind the instruments and asked shakily. I'm fine. I feel great now. Norman, who had woken up, looked at his hands and said with great satisfaction. As a result, he not only solved the issue of hereditary diseases, he even allowed his body to evolve. He took his coat and put it back on. His face returned to normal. All right. Let's continue the experiment. Put Connors into a sturdier cell. We will use him as a demonstration for the military tomorrow. Norman Osborn raised his hand and said one after another. Yes. Just as he was about to say something, the door to the experiment floor suddenly opened. A man in a suit hurriedly walked in. He was the personal secretary of Osborn. He was responsible for the usual administrative handling. What is it? Norman tidied up his clothes and asked. Mr. Norman, everyone from the board of directors has arrived at the conference room upstairs. They invited you over. It seems that they have something to announce. The secretary lowered his head and said softly, Got it. I'll be back soon. Norman nodded. Then, he instructed the staff around him. He followed his secretary and took the elevator to the meeting room on the 82th floor. Here. It was where Osborne's board of directors were. The frosted glass door automatically opened. Norman Osborne walked in with his head held high. In the huge conference room, all the board members were already seated in their respective seats. Everyone. My experiment has reached the most crucial point. What's the matter? Can't we wait until tomorrow's military inspection? Norman Osborne walked to the main seat, looked around, and said indifferently. Norman. What is this report about? One of the directors threw a report angrily in front of Osborne. Norman glanced at it lightly. He knew that he had embezzled the company funds. You know. The human body enhancement plan requires a lot of money. I'm just borrowing it for a bit. Norman Osborne spread out his hands and said casually. Borrow it? Do you know how much damage you've caused for the company? Another director also shouted. That's right. Norman. Because of your recklessness. The company's stock price has dropped more than 20%. Someone beside him also agreed. I think it's time to change the chairman of this company. Chapter 131, Kamen Rider Era. At this moment, an old man sitting across from Norman suddenly spoke up. He was the oldest among the directors. He was also the one who held the most shares. That's right. The other directors also echoed. It looks like you guys seem to have planned this. But at this time, Norman Osborne couldn't help but feel a little uneasy when he heard these words. However, there was not much of a reaction. He sat in his seat with his head lowered, seemingly sneering. We are only thinking about the company. The old man said with a smile. Then let's make a vote. The directors. They all raised their hands, preparing to dismiss Norman. Since that's the case, then you can't blame me. Norman Osborne, at this time. He slowly raised his head. In his eyes, there was a green light. Terrifying and penetrating. And at this time, the administrative secretary outside was anxiously waiting for the result. He was a direct subordinate of Norman Osborne. If Norman was removed, he would not have a good ending either. Then, he would not have a good ending either. What should we do? He anxiously stomped his feet outside. However, at this time, the originally noisy meeting room suddenly quieted down. The secretary scratched his head, looking very puzzled. Thus, he could not resist the temptation of curiosity. He slowly walked forward. He wanted to see what was happening inside through the gap in the frosted glass door. However, right at this moment, boom! A figure flew straight over. Suddenly, it crashed into the frosted glass. Immediately after, many directors were frantically knocking on the frosted glass door. They were shouting something loudly. It was as if something extremely terrifying was happening inside. Oh! My God! The secretary was so scared that he hurriedly retreated. He did not dare to stay here any longer. As for the director who was stuck on the frosted glass door, however, they were all pulled back by unknown objects one by one. In less than a moment, the entire conference room. It was as if peace had returned. And at this time, in the conference room, on the ground lay countless shattered corpses. Blood filled the entire conference room. Be it chairs, tables, or glass. They could be seen everywhere. It was like hell on earth. And at this time, the old man sitting opposite Norman. He was hiding under the conference table, shivering. The scene just now was too terrifying. He simply could not believe what was happening in front of him. However, right at this moment, Kaka! The meeting table was split in half. It fell towards the surroundings. The old man was also exposed. He raised his head shakily. He saw Norman Osborne standing in front of him. Only, at this moment, he no longer looked like a human. He looked more like a devil. Please let me go. I'm willing to give you all the shares I have. The old man hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged. However, that Norman Osborne was completely unmoved. He sneered. Then, he raised his hand and placed it on that fellow's head. He gently twisted. A cracking sound was heard. His neck was completely twisted. Blood spurted out. His body fell. An antique coin in the pocket of his shirt rolled down. Norman Osborn's eyes were filled with joy. He raised his hand. He licked his claws. However, what he did not expect was the surveillance camera above the conference room had recorded all of this. It was a perfect record. And within Hiden Intelligence headquarters, Levi took in all of this. How cruel! As he spoke, he blew on the tea in his hand. Now, the time is ripe. Aizu, take this Osborn's video. Announced Seed together with his experiment. He took a sip of the tea in his hand. However, he said indifferently. Yes, master. Aizu heard this. When the documents were about to be processed, it was posted on the internet. Then, it was released on the internet. It was just this time. She did not send it to the media. Instead, she placed the video on YouTube. As for Levi, he narrowed his eyes. Then next, a grand banquet is about to be held. When the time comes, everyone will go on stage. And I will personally open the Kamen Rider era. He put down the teacup in his hand. Chapter 132, Leaked Video of Green Goblin. Levi is full with ambition. Because of Aizu's action, this video was uploaded. It instantly blew up the internet. The number of clicks in the video skyrocketed. That cruel and bloody scene. It shocked everyone. Oh my god! This guy is simply a devil. That's right, and the government actually tolerated this kind of experiment. Unforgivable. They will all go to hell. I almost vomited when I saw this scene. Fuck. Every year, we pay so much tax to the government. Is it used to make this kind of thing? For a moment, the comments section was full of curses. The number was also increasing crazily. In less than a moment, it was already 9,999 plus. When the staff of the video website noticed this scene, they couldn't help but be shocked. They immediately opened the backstage to delete it. If this was an ordinary video, they would naturally not deal with it. On the contrary, they might even give it a recommendation. After all, it could increase the popularity of the website. Why not? But now, this was a video, but it involved the government. Moreover, this Osborn Industries had given them a sponsorship before. So they did not dare to be rash. He was prepared to delete the video first before waiting for the news. To avoid unnecessary trouble. But no matter how hard the staff tried, they could not delete the video. Damn it! What the hell is going on? They scratched their hair and looked confused. As for Aizu, she wrinkled her nose. How could someone delete the video she released? Just like this. As time passed, the popularity of this video was also rising like a snowball. For a moment, the news of Osborn's human experiments had rushed up to all kinds of hot rankings. Everyone knew. At the same time, rumors were everywhere, and noise was everywhere. The situation also became more and more serious. If it were an ordinary experiment, the people would grit their teeth or perhaps be able to endure it. But now, however, this Osborn Industries was using civilians to conduct human experiments. Moreover, what he had created was the seed of disdain. This kind of situation where morality and laws were nothing. It was simply too terrifying. At the same time, the entire Osborn Industries was in a mess. Many people could no longer endure it. They left angrily. As for those who did not know the situation, they were still trying to salvage the situation. They were not clear about Osborn's plan at the Public Relations Department. They had thought that it was just a simple scheme. Thus, they immediately released a clarification statement. Who knew? As soon as the statement was released, not only did it not have any effect. Instead, a large group of excited people poured in. The government also quickly discovered this. Thus, they quickly contacted the military. Confirm the truth of this matter. At the same time, they immediately called New York Police Station. Send him to arrest Norman Osborn and bring him to the police station. Chief George, after receiving the order, immediately lead the elites under your command to go there. As for the Ames guards, they are biding their time. They were waiting for the orders of their president, Levi. And at this time, in the conference room of Osborn's higher UPS, the disturbance outside seemed to have nothing to do with this place. He saw that Norman Osborn was lying on the ground. He ate the delicious food in large mouthfuls. The rustling sound continued for a long time. He finally looked up as if he had eaten his fill. The fresh blood at the corner of his mouth made him look extremely horrifying at this moment. Just like a zombie. And at this time, the green color in his eyes slowly faded away. It's so delicious. He stood up, picked up a tissue in satisfaction, and wiped the corner of his mouth. He was like a gentleman who had just enjoyed a delicious meal. Then, he stepped on the mutilated corpses on the ground. He left the meeting room. He returned to his chairman's office. He pulled open his collar and lay down on his office chair, ready to take a break. But at this time, the glass screen in front of him suddenly lit up. The image of the mysterious man from last time lit up again. Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn slowly opened his eyes when he heard this voice. General Mazik. What's the matter? My plan to strengthen my body has been successful. Tomorrow, you can bring people to carry out the examination. Norman raised his hand and said with a smile. Now, he had already dealt with the annoying group of board members. As long as he passed the military's review, he would receive investment. Then, his Osborn Industries would expand again, reaching an unimaginable height. At that time, what bullshit Stark Industry, Hiden Intelligence, all of them would submit to him. At this moment, Norman Osborn was filled with ambition. He was flying ambitiously. However, what the military big shot said next splashed him with cold water. Accept the arrest. Are you talking about the human experiment that was exposed? Osborn, you are really a madman. The current military does not dare to have anything to do with you. Tomorrow, there will be no bullshit review at all. The military big shot roared crazily. Now, even I am being investigated. I am afraid I will have to go to the military court soon. He said angrily. What happened? Osborn asked in confusion. Chapter 133, Rainy Devil Project. Osborn quickly stood up and asked. What's going on? Go online and take a look. Also, it's best that you don't tell anyone about what happened between us. Otherwise. Halfway through his words, the virtual call was directly shut off. It was as if he did not want to have anything to do with him anymore. Norman Osborn frowned. What was going on? He should have done an excellent job of keeping it a secret. He immediately opened a video website. On it, the human experiments he had conducted before appeared. Moreover, they were all the cruelest ones. The more Norman Osborn looked, the more shocked he became. The scene there. It was the scene of him slaughtering the directors. After seeing this scene, Norman Osborn's anger rose. Who is it? Who dared to do this? He stood up. He walked to the window. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He raised his hand and punched the window beside him. Boom! The tempered glass shattered. Countless pieces fell down. A strong wind swept in from the outside. It blew on that Norman Osborn's suit, making it flutter. One must know. He was only one step away from success. But now, with the exposure of the video, all his efforts were destroyed. The military and government could not cooperate with him anymore. And Osborn Industries' reputation would also plummet. The angry masses would not tolerate the existence of such a company at all. And at this time, the sound of police cars also rang out in the distance. Obviously, the government had already sent people over. They wanted to arrest him and bring him back to justice. This is the only way. Only then would they be able to quell the anger of the people. Ha ha ha. However, at this time, standing by the window, Norman Osborn suddenly laughed wildly. You forced me to do all of this. He looked at the police car below. The green in his eyes swept over again. There was a sense of madness and determination. Since now, the situation had already come to this point. Then, he no longer had to worry about anything. Weren't these guys afraid of the monsters in the video? Were they afraid of it? Then himself. He would carry out an even more large-scale experiment. He would use the entire New York as an experimental ground. He would use 8 million people as experimental subjects. Dissolving Amazon's call into common medicine, he would assimilate all New York's people. With that, he would no longer be an alien. Osborn Industries would also be able to survive. Or he could also earn a huge profit by selling protein inhibitors. This was also his only chance to break out of this situation. Thinking of this, Norman Osborn no longer hesitated. Then, let the experiment begin. I really want to see it. What kind of faces will you make later? Norman Osborn returned to his seat and looked at the comments below the screen. He sneered and said, "Of course. If he wanted to carry out such an experiment, he needed a bit of time. After all, to infect the 8 million people of New York, it required a huge amount of Amazon solvent. And then, through the proliferation machine of their company, they would spread it into the clouds. In the end, let Amazon dissolve the liquid and turn it into rain. Spread it throughout the entire New York City. This way, he would infect the entire New York." He named this plan Rainy Devil Project. Speaking of which, in this Kamen Rider Amazon, in the first season, the villain also passed a Rainy Devil Project by making medicine in the wild. The goal was to make 4,000 Amazon in the city. And now, this Norman Osborn wanted to use this to create 8 million Amazon. Speaking of which, it was really ironic. However, prepare so many Amazon potions. It would still take some time. However, not long after, these policemen would break into Osborn building. This was very likely to disrupt his plans. Therefore, to buy time, he was prepared to release all the Amazons in captivity in the underground laboratory. One had to know. He had locked up those Amazons for a long time. Each and every one of them was extremely hungry. Once they were released, they would definitely hunt the surrounding humans. This way, the police would definitely stop him. The two sides were locked in battle. Naturally, they had no time to stop their plan. Thinking of this Norman Osborn did not hesitate. He immediately headed to the underground laboratory. "Mr. Norman." As soon as they saw him come down, everyone gathered around him. "All of you, now. Bring all of the Amazon solvents on the scene to the laboratory. Conduct a mass production." He waved his hand and ordered the researchers. Those scientists, although puzzled, however, they didn't dare to question him. He had no choice but to follow his instructions and head up. As for Norman Osborn, he had arrived at the central chamber of the underground laboratory. Chapter 134, Raid on the Oscorp Tower. Inside, one could see all of Amazon's situation. On the screen, hundreds of experimental subjects were trapped in a small room. Many of them were already so hungry that they couldn't even come to their senses. Now, it's time to make a scene. As he spoke, he immediately entered the password. All of a sudden, all the cages that held Amazon's experimental subjects opened simultaneously. Rumble. In the dark room, numerous terrifying figures walked out of the cage. Their scarlet eyes were extremely horrifying. They were like zombies. They sniffed the air. Then, they rushed outside crazily. Then, let the hunt begin. "My children." Norman Osborn saw this scene through the surveillance camera. Then, he clapped his hands and laughed loudly. At this time, outside the Osborn building, dozens of police cars had arrived. They surrounded the outside of Osborn building. They were prepared to jump in and check out the situation. Besides them, there was a crowd of onlookers. After all, in this world, there would never be a lack of spectators. Not only that, many reporters from television stations had also arrived at the scene. This was a rare piece of news. None of them seemed to want to miss it. They held the microphone and faced the camera. Then, the live broadcast began. "Dear viewers and friends, we have arrived at the entrance of Osborn Building. The police are preparing to rush in. Let's see what's going on inside Osborn Industries. Please look forward to the first-hand news that Fox TV will bring you." The television station had broadcasted everything on the scene. Without holding anything back, everything was broadcasted. And at this time, Chief George commanded his men to prepare to sneak into the scene. His police officers were all armed to the teeth. With assault rifles in hand, they looked extremely valiant. "All right, let's go." Chief George waved his hand. The dozens of police officers under him rushed toward Osborn's building. However, at this time, those who had been starving for a long time had already walked out of the underground experimental floor. Because at this time, it was already night. This Osborn building was under the control of Norman. All the electricity was focused in one place. It was used above for the production of Amazon's solvent. So, this also caused the other places to be abnormally dark. These policemen held submachine guns in their hands and carefully walked in the originally large hall of Osborne. At this moment, it was completely shrouded in darkness. There was a faint sound. A police officer felt a little curious. Thus, he started going his way towards that place. However, right at this moment, in the darkness, a tentacle suddenly appeared. It suddenly wrapped around this fellow's waist. Then, he suddenly pulled. Then, he dragged her into the darkness. Immediately after, the remaining policemen heard a scream. Not good. The captain of the police officers heard the sound. His face immediately changed. Quick, shoot. He immediately raised the gun in his hand. He aimed at the place where the tentacle had extended and pulled the trigger. When the other police officers saw this, they also turned their guns. They fired at that place. Day. For a moment, flames spewed out. A spear of flames appeared. Bullets were fired at the same time. The dark place was instantly illuminated. In the distance, several experimental subjects were lying on the ground, eating the police officer from before. The ground was covered in blood. The scene was extremely bloody. And after the bullets came, blood burst out from the bodies of those guys. Intense pain. It made them stop eating. They turned their head and looked at the policeman. Their scarlet eyes were full of anger. Damn it! You actually dare to disturb our feeding time. But that's good too. This one isn't even worth a bit of our share. I'll let you serve as our new food. As he spoke, a few of the experimental subjects couldn't help but stand up. They opened their hands and roared at the sky. Immediately after, the black lines spread out from their necks. Immediately after, a loud boom, along with a burst of high-pressure steam. These experimental subjects had instantly undergone a mutation. They had transformed into a mutated Amazon. Every one of them looked incomparably ferocious. It looked extremely terrifying. Some transformed into Mantis Amazon. Their entire body was wrapped in green shells. Their arms turned into Mantis blade. At this time, facing the attack of the bullets, it was fearless. Because it could not pierce through its armor. It could only leave a shallow scratch on it. Chapter 135, Sating the Appetite of an Amazon. He waved the Mantis blade in his hand, and with a swoosh, a police officer and the gun in his hand were cut into two pieces. Blood gushed out. And there was another person who transformed into a sea urchin Amazon. His entire body was covered in spikes. His body trembled. Dozens of spikes shot out. Su. These spikes were like bullets. In an instant, they pierced through the body of a police officer. They pierced through him like a sieve. Looking at the miserable state of the person beside him, some of the police officers were so scared that their legs were trembling. They had never seen such a situation before. One of the guys was so scared that he threw away the gun in his hand. He spread his legs and ran out of the door. However, a bat Amazon instantly locked onto him. He treated him as his prey. This fellow immediately flew into the air. He flapped his black wings and flew towards that fellow. And at this time, the outside world was still unaware of the situation inside. Everyone was still watching. And the reporters who interviewed were not idle either. Some interviewed passers-by about Osborne Industries' human experiments. Some. They even visited Chief George directly. Chief George. May I ask about this operation? How confident are you? A female reporter with a pretty face held a microphone and asked Chief Officer George. Our police officers are all the most professional. I believe that they will handle it well. Chief George was also an experienced veteran. He spoke frankly and confidently when faced with the reporter's question. He seemed extremely self-confident. However, just as they were talking, Osborne's glass door suddenly shattered. A dark figure was grabbing something. It flew out from within. It was none other than the bat Amazon from before. On its claws were the police officers who had escaped. They were holding the fleeing officer in their hands to prevent him from escaping. This bat Amazon didn't control his speed well. He dove down. Only after smashing the glass door did he capture this fellow. Facing this prey, the bat Amazon didn't hold back. He pressed one of them to the ground and bared his sharp teeth. He bit towards the police officer's neck. For a moment, blood gushed out. Chief George and the reporter looked at each other in dismay. They didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, the Bat Amazon was surrounded by the crowd. It did not feel like anything wrong. On the contrary, after tasting the blood, it went berserk. It directly tore the fellow beneath it apart. Then, it began to eat in large mouthfuls. The scene was bloody to the extreme. The onlookers outside saw this scene. They were stunned at first. The entire square was silent. Soon after, bursts of ear-piercing screams could be heard. After all, when had they ever seen such a bloody scene at such a close distance? Some people even puked. And at this time, the Bat Amazon rushed out. The other Amazons also charged out from the Osborne building. Seeing so many humans, these Amazons' eyes lit up, and they were abnormally excited. They immediately pounced forward and began a bloody hunt. In the sky, the Crow Amazon circled. On the ground, the Queen Ant Amazon was tyrannical. The crowd was in a panic. Like headless flies, they fled in all directions. But how could they compare to Amazon's speed? For a moment, the entire surroundings of Osborne building had turned into a prison on Earth. Even George didn't dare to stay any longer. He hurriedly hid. He fled in all directions, looking extremely miserable. And just as everyone was fleeing in panic, they were fleeing. However, there were still reporters who didn't care about their lives, holding cameras. They hid in a corner and continued to shoot and turn the broadcast. Hey! Ladies and gentlemen! I am the reporter in front of Daily Bugle, Eddie Brooke. I will bring you first-hand information here. Eddie Brooke hid behind the two cars. He held the camera and started a real-time broadcast to the situation in the square. In the lens, there were scenes of Amazon cannibaling everywhere. The scene was extremely brutal. As for the audience in front of the television, after seeing this scene, they were stunned. They couldn't help but cover their mouths. They couldn't believe what was happening in front of them. Many people couldn't help but pray for a miracle to happen. Looking at the atrocities of Amazon below, this Norman Osborn, however, felt extremely pleased. He even poured himself a glass of whiskey. After he transformed into Amazon, ordinary food was already unable to satisfy his appetite. But this wine, it could still stimulate his mouth. Chaos! Chaos! Everyone! Soon, you will also become one of them. Norman Osborn raised his hand and raised the square glass in the light. He toasted the entire New York. Then, the entire office let out a terrifying laugh. It made everyone shudder. Chapter 136, The Secret Laboratory. Right in front of the Osborne building, a group of mutated Amazons was dancing in a frenzy, all of them in a state of madness. However, in an underground tunnel below it, it was abnormally quiet. Only the sound of footsteps could be heard continuously. Two figures were seen walking in the middle of it, holding a flashlight in their hands. Hey, Ned, how's the investigation going? Have we arrived yet? One of them asked. Parker, don't be in such a hurry. The base map shows that they are moving forward 100 meters. It should be the abandoned subway station that you mentioned. These two people were no other people. They were our Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and his good friend Ned. Ever since Parker woke up, he had not been idle. First, he went to the intensive care unit to look at this uncle. This uncle was in a coma, and he was still unconscious. However, he was basically out of danger. This made Parker feel a lot more at ease. So next, Parker did not want to stay in the ward. He and Ned immediately prepared to head back to the demon dimension. It was said that there was something inside. There was information left behind by his father. The subway station heard. Are you sure? Parker was somewhat uncertain. Of course. Don't forget. I am a member of our school geographical society. The little fatty said proudly as he held the GPS device in one hand. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the abandoned Ridge station. Looking at the date, this should be 20 years ago, the subway has changed. So it was abandoned. Ned wiped the dusty wall and said, Parker, are you sure there are things your father left for you here? His fat face was full of doubts. Probably. Parker was not very sure either. The two of them started searching here. However, after searching for half a day, they did not find any clues. Could it be that the devil dimension was lying to me? Parker scratched his head. It should not be. As for Ned, he was panting a little. He leaned against a wall and prepared to rest. Who knew? His palm pressed against the brick and caved in. Immediately after, a rumbling sound was heard. It was as if there was a mechanism operating. The wall suddenly opened. The entrance appeared in front of them. Wow! Parker and Ned looked at each other. Their faces were full of surprise. They immediately walked in. As the two of them walked in, the lights in the interior automatically lit up. A spacious laboratory appeared in front of the two of them. Heavens! Parker! This is simply too cool. It was as if Ned had discovered a new continent. As for Parker, he looked at everything in front of him in astonishment. He glanced at the sticker on the wall. According to the date, it should also be a 20-year experiment record. Looks like. Back then, his father, Richard Parker, had secretly set up a laboratory here. To do research. Parker walked to the center of the laboratory. He turned on the computer. In the computer, there were some experimental records of Richard Parker. And some of his diary experiences. Parker looked over all the way. He found that it was as the Devil Dimension said. His father's death was related to that Osborne Industries. To prevent his experimental results from being abused. That was why he was near the Osborne building. He had established this secret base. Father! Trust me. I will definitely avenge you. Parker clenched his fists and swore inwardly. On the other side, Ned. He was like a curious baby. I'll look around here and look around there. Not long after, he found a small box on an experiment table. This small box seemed to have a strange magic power. This made Ned's gaze linger on it, unable to move away. He walked forward and raised his hand. Crack! He opened the box. The thing inside instantly lit up Ned's eyes. He saw a crimson belt inside. All around, 4 seals were placed there. Wow! What a cool seal! Ned looked a little stunned. He picked up one of the seals. Unconsciously, he wanted to press it on his own body. Hey! Wait, Ned! Just as the seal was about to press on Ned's body, Parker rushed over. He snatched the seal away. Hey! That was close. A magnificent performance. He looked at the seal in his hand and couldn't help but gasp. Ha ha ha! If this kid presses it down, I'm afraid I have another companion. Right at this moment, that illusory venom spider suddenly sprang out from Parker's body, laughing as he said. Chapter 137, It's all the Osborne again. At the same time, Ned, who had been robbed of his seal, instantly woke up. Just now, he seemed to have been bewitched. Holding the seal, he couldn't help but want to carve it on his body. He shook his head. He wanted to tell Parker about his feelings. Who knew that as soon as he turned around, he saw something like a ghost wrapping around Parker. This made him quiver, and he immediately took a step back in fear. Parker! What is that on your body? He asked shakily. You can actually see it. After Parker heard this, he was stunned. But on second thought, perhaps it was because he touched the devil seal. Since he saw it, Parker did not hide it. Therefore, he told her everything that had happened to him. Oh my God! You mean, you went to an unknown dimension? Then, you sold your soul in exchange for power. This is too cool. After Ned heard this, he had no doubts. Instead, he was so envious that his eyes were sparkling. After all, in his opinion, this was really too cool. This was simply a magical operation that only existed in a comic. Then Parker, can you show me transformation? Just like Iron Man? Ned raised his hand, his face full of anticipation. No, Ned. I will only use this armor when I need it. Parker immediately refused. Then, he put away the demon seal and belt and continued to look at his father's records. As for Ned, he was mesmerized by Venom, who was Parker's demon. Let him tell him about what happened in the demon dimension. At the beginning, Venom was still excited. After all, this was the second human who could see him apart from Parker. But not long after, Venom could not take it anymore. This guy was even more talkative than Parker. His mouth was like a machine gun, clicking non-stop. Venom was confused by his noise. In the end, he really could not stand it. He could only plunge into Parker's body. Hey, brother! Do you want to chat a little longer? When Ned saw this, he seemed a little disappointed. However, he quickly shifted his attention. Didn't Parker say that he would only transform when he needed it? Then now, he would check on it online. Was there a place where New York was suffering a disaster? In this way, wouldn't he be able to see Parker's transformation? Thus, Ned took out his phone. He prepared to search. As a technical geek, he had previously hacked into the network of New York's police station. Who knew? As soon as he turned on his phone, Ned was shocked. Oh my god! Parker, come and take a look. Wait a minute, Ned. I have an emergency. Unexpectedly, Parker did not even turn his head. There was nothing more urgent than this. Ned rushed forward and handed the phone to Parker. Parker took the phone with a slightly puzzled look. He heard a series of screams coming from inside. On the hand phone was the live broadcast of Eddie Brooke. On the screen, there were scenes of Amazon hunting humans everywhere. This was a live broadcast. It was focused on a spider Amazon. This guy was crawling on a cargo car. It continuously spat out spider silk, surrounding the fleeing humans. Its spider silk unfortunately wrapped up a fellow. He was directly hung up. As for the spider Amazon, he followed the spider silk and crawled to its side, directly devouring it brutally. That terrifying scene caused Ned and Parker to change their expressions. What is going on? Parker hurriedly asked. It seems to be Osborne Industries conducting biochemical experiments. In the end, these man-eating experimental subjects all ran out. Ned scratched his fat face and explained. It's Osborne again. A hint of anger appeared on Parker's face. One had to know. He had quite a bit of connections with this Osborne Industries. Not to mention, his father, Richard Parker, was most likely killed by them. Just like before. That cheetah Amazon, who almost took my life. I'm afraid that it was also Osborne who ran out of the lab ahead of time. New enmity and old hatred. Naturally, he could not just sit by and do nothing. Ned. How far are we from this Osborne building? Parker looked at Ned with a solemn expression. Wait a minute, I'll check it out. Ned closed the live stream room and immediately checked it on his phone. Not long after, he raised his phone again. There was a three-dimensional map on it. They were at the station. It was only 250 meters away from Osborne building. Through a few sewers, they would be able to reach the square in front of Osborne's building. Good. After Parker finished reading, he picked up the small box. He prepared to charge at it. Wait, bring me along too. Ned also wanted to join in on the fun. The two of them went all the way to the ruckus. Then, they arrived at the water system below Osborne Square. Hey, Ned. Wait a minute. I'll be transforming into a Kamen Rider. Just stand aside and help me hold the box. I'll protect you. Parker looked at his good friend and said solemnly. Then, he took out Demon's Driver and the Spider Sin seal from his box. Then, he handed the remaining seal and box to Ned, who was beside him. No problem. Chapter 138, The party has just begun. Ned took the small box and nodded. Instantly, he felt that he had a great responsibility. As for Parker, he picked up the driver and the seal. He immediately unfolded the belt. It was accompanied by the sound effects and light. Kamen Rider demons appeared in a flash. Wow! This operation stunned Ned, who was at the side. I will also hide my identity. As he spoke, he pulls up his hood and puts it on his head. Parker nodded. Immediately, he brought Ned along and opened the manhole cover. He leaped upwards. On the other side, in a mansion next to a cliff, New York was brightly lit. This was one of the houses of the rich and powerful Tony Stark. This guy had just held a party at home. After having his way with a girl, it was very pleasant. He was lying on the bed, preparing to watch the program. Who knew? He turned on the TV. He saw that the situation in front of Osborne's building was being broadcasted. Tony immediately frowned. Osborne Industries was in existence on par with Stark Industry. Unexpectedly, such a thing had actually happened. Since that was the case, then, he had no choice but to make a move. With that thought, he abandoned the girl and headed straight to his laboratory. With the assistance of the mechanical arm. In just a few moments, he had already put on the Model 02 steel armor. Whoo! Along with the flames from his limbs, Iron Man Mark 02 Rider rose into the air. Jarvis! Help me plan the closest distance to Osborne Building. Understood, sir. It will take 1 minute and 2 seconds to reach Osborne Building. The route plan is complete. Jarvis replied immediately. In the night sky, the Red Iron Man instantly turned into a shooting star. He headed in the direction of Osborne at full speed. Hield headquarters. Nick Fury looked at the video that was sent back. He couldn't help but frown deeply. The moment it happened, the military and government had sent the news to him. In fact, regarding this Osborne Industries, the Joint Army, the matter of developing the human body strengthening drug. He understood. However, from the very beginning, he had never had any hope for this. After all, if he wanted to develop this thing, he might as well directly find Captain America. But he didn't expect. This Norman Osborn really did get it out. Only the commotion it caused. Isn't it a bit too big? As he spoke, he looked at another screen. On it, it was playing the chaos in front of Osborne's building. As SHIELD, he had to appear. Settle this matter. And just at this time, the door to his office was directly knocked on. Come in. Nick Fury turned around. The person who entered his office was none other than Hawkeye. It was Hawkeye, who was equally famous as Black Widow within SHIELD. Barton. I believe you already know the situation of Osborne's biochemical experiment. I will arrange for you to go to the scene now. Nick Fury turned his head and looked at Hawkeye, who was ready to shoot and carrying a bow on his back. He immediately said, "Of course. Except for the people who saved the scene. I want you to get the experimental report of Osborne." Nick Fury turned around, his body in the shadows. Understood, Director. Barton heard this and smiled lightly. Then he walked out of the office. He watched as Hawkeye left. Nick Fury raised his hand and clicked open the other end of the silent video. In the video, the red monster was fighting with Lizard Amazon. He looked at the video. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Meanwhile, at the outer perimeter of SHIELD's headquarters, a Black Eagle fighter jet had already been waiting for a long time. Hawkeye put on his battle uniform. Behind him, there were more than 10 elite agents. The door of the warship closed. They flew towards Osborne Building. For a moment, the entire Osborne Building seemed to have become the center of a storm. And in Hiden Intelligence headquarters, Levi was still sitting in the president's office. Through the surveillance, looking at everything that he had personally created, and in the face of all actions, he naturally knew everything like the back of his hand. Aizu. Now, we can let Yaiba and Isamu go. We're going to the scene. He knocked on the table and ordered Aizu, who was beside him. Yes, President. Aizu nodded. He immediately sent the message to Isamu and Yaiba, who were waiting in the police station. In the police station, the two people who received the order immediately informed them. They changed to the headquarters and were given the latest guns. They took several Ames police cars and headed to the scene. It looked like the party had just begun. Chapter 139, The Party Has Just Begun, 2. This feels like an episode before a main event of Kamen Rider Universe happen. Very good. Watching those Humajir depart, Levi revealed a satisfied smile. Immediately after, he turned his head again and looked at Aizu. How is the process of upgrading Projurisekis? President. 8 programs of Projurisekis have been completely completed. The battle data has also been completed. When Levi heard this, the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. Very good. Then now, it's also time for me. As he spoke, he stood up and took the elevator from the president's room, all the way to the lowest level. And this time, Aizu also followed behind him. Soon, he had already reached the 6th underground floor. The door opened. Aizu, who was inside, seemed to have received an order long ago. She waited at the door. When she saw Aizu behind Levi, she did not say anything. Because she knew. Next, the president wanted to do something. He needed Aizu's help. All right. Then, prepare to begin. Levi sat on his exclusive throne. As for Aizu and Aizu, they were lined up on both sides of him. In the sky, Satellite Zia also began to operate. Beneath the ground, Satellite Arc also began to glow with red light. after the gathering of Ames's guards and Metsubujinrai.net during this period. The malice that this arc possessed. It had already reached around 50%. Although the distance to full was still far. There was still a period. However, it was still possible to use it to create a set of weapons and armor for himself. Along with Levi's order, it was issued. The two secretaries behind him had also connected to their respective satellites. A blue light flashed in Izu's eyes. She raised her hand and entered a string of passwords on the screen. As for Izu, she appeared relaxed and relaxed. She circled her long hair with one hand and controlled something with the other. A malicious red light flashed continuously in her eyes. As the two of them operated, the two satellites accelerated their operations. The satellite in the sky, Zia, immediately released a burst of light. It shot downwards. The blue light landed right under Hiden's headquarters. And the underground satellite arc. It was also like a malicious eruption. A red light shot out from the center like a pair of evil eyes. It shot upwards. The two beams of light finally converged on the bottom layer of the Hiden Intelligence headquarters. As the two rays of light surged in, one of the huge and precise 3D printers seemed to be summoned by the two satellites. It immediately started working. A mysterious belt was immediately printed. A bright light appeared on it. It looked very cool and mysterious. And on Levi's side, while carrying out a certain plan, the Osborne building over there, Spider-Man, Iron Man and the others had also arrived at the scene. And the one who arrived first. Naturally, it was Spider-Man who was the closest. On the wide field, the manhole cover of a sewer suddenly flew up. With a bang, the mouth fell to the side. Immediately after, a vigorous figure jumped out of the sewer. Shua! He somersaulted in the air. Then, he was like a spider. He landed firmly on the ground. The entire process was extremely elegant. This is our Spider-Man, Peter Parker. However, just as Parker wanted to move forward a little, when he arrived at the chaotic battlefield, he began a decisive battle with those Amazon. Ned shouted from the sewers below. Hey, Parker! Quick, pull me! I think I'm stuck. There was no way. Parker could only withdraw his footsteps. He returned to the manhole. He raised his hand and shot out a spider web. Pulling and pulling, it took a lot of effort. Only then did he pull the little fatty, Ned, up. Phew! Parker wiped his forehead, then instructed Ned. Hey! Ned, listen up. I might not be able to take care of you during a battle. You must find a place to hide. Ned lay on the ground, panting as well. Don't worry, Parker. He immediately made an okay pose. Then, he waved his hand, leave me alone, Parker. Hurry up and go. As he spoke, he scanned his surroundings. Soon, he found a hidden spot. Carrying the box, he carefully crawled towards that place. When Parker saw this, he could not help but feel relieved. All right, then it's my turn to go on stage. Parker clenched his right fist and gave himself a bow. Then, he raised his hand. The spider silk immediately shot out, sticking to the street lamp at the side. Parker used the power of the spider silk to fly up into the air. He immediately headed to the front of Osborne Building. And the closer he was to Osborne Building, the scene became more and more chaotic. The car flipped over, and fire rose from all directions. Amazon came out in full force. They hunted and killed the panicked humans. Chapter 140, Spider-Man, Descent. Everything looked like the end of the world. Terrifying. Parker had just arrived above the chaos. He saw a blonde girl at the edge, avoiding the pursuit of the leopard Amazon. The golden-haired girl was extremely flustered. Her clothes were all torn, but she was completely unaware. One wanted to escape. However, her speed was no match for this leopard Amazon. The leopard Amazon pounced. Roar! He immediately pressed the girl to the ground. His sharp claws carried his shoulder. The girl below trembled in fear at the sight of this ugly leopard Amazon. Her tears flowed wildly. However, this leopard Amazon didn't show the slightest bit of mercy. He opened his mouth and prepared to feast. However, at this moment, a frivolous voice suddenly sounded from the side. Hey, ugly! Don't you know that you should be more polite to a lady? Look here! When the leopard Amazon heard this voice, he subconsciously looked up. However, at this moment, A spider web flew over without warning. With a swoosh, it firmly stuck to the leopard Amazon's mouth. It sealed him completely. Woo! This leopard Amazon immediately turned pale with fright. He hurriedly raised his claws and prepared to rip off the spider web stuck in his mouth. Who knew? Not only did the spider web not tear down, but it also did not budge a bit. On the other hand, the golden-haired girl beneath him used this rare opportunity. She flipped over and stood up. She ran off into the distance. Seeing the prey flying away, the leopard Amazon was furious. He immediately wanted to chase after her. Who knew that right at this moment? This guy suffered another blow to his back. It was so painful that he roared. Needless to say, it was the masterpiece of Parker. Hey, ugly monster, your opponent is me. He raised his finger and shook it at the leopard Amazon. Thank you. The blonde woman looked at Peter Parker behind her. She quickly expressed her gratitude. You're welcome. This beautiful lady. Parker waved his hand behind him and said in an extremely relaxed manner. As expected, the leopard Amazon opposite him turned his head around. He looked angrily at Peter Parker, who was swaying everywhere. He roared. He immediately launched an attack at Parker. You came at the right time. Parker was full of confidence at this moment. One had to know. This guy in front of him was very similar to the cheetah Amazon from back then. His speed was very fast. However, his attack power wasn't strong. Back then, when he faced this type of guy. Unfortunately, he had suffered a crushing defeat. But today, everything was different. Facing such a guy, Parker dealt with him very easily. He had spider silk hanging from him. It shuttled back and forth in the surroundings. Hey! Ugly monster! Come quickly! Meanwhile, the leopard cat Amazon followed behind him. He ran wildly all the way. He was like a little dog being teased. And this scene. Eddie Brooke, who was not far away, saw it. Hey, everyone! Guess what I saw? He quickly turned the camera around. It shone towards Peter Parker. In a split second, the audience saw the scene. A man wearing a spider armor was in the middle of the building, swaying and moving. The leopard Amazon behind him was out of breath. And at this time, shua, shua, shua. Another few threads of spider silk attacked. The leopard Amazon couldn't dodge in time. His limbs were stuck to the wall. He wanted to struggle. However, the strong stickiness of the spider silk made it impossible for him to break free. Then, be obedient and die. And at this moment, Parker, who was far away, hung the spider silk. It flew over. A spider flying kick. It immediately kicked the leopard cat Amazon into pieces. It was accompanied by an explosion. Parker turned around handsomely. Extremely elegant. Such a wonderful battle scene. It was instantly broadcast out. For a moment, the crowd in the TV series was in an uproar. After all, just now, it had always been humans being slaughtered. But now, there was actually an Amazon who had been killed. Although it couldn't change the overall situation, it could still stir people's hearts. On the internet, some people applauded. Nicely done. Too cool. He really is our superhero. What is this guy's name? I feel like I'm about to fall in love with him. As for Eddie Brooke, he was abnormally excited to see Parker's actions. One had to know. The situation just now was too cruel. This caused many spectators to choose to close it. They couldn't bear to watch any more. However, because of this guy's appearance, the audience surged again. Hey, that's my brother. How is it? Not bad, right? Chapter 141, The Spider Rider and the Iron Rider. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. Eddie looked to the side. He saw a little fatty wearing a hood appear around him at some point in time. Oh. Not bad. What's his name? Eddie Brooke hurriedly nodded. You have to know. Right now, the entire internet was paying attention to this guy. If they could dig out his true identity, that would definitely be a big piece of news. As for Ned, he didn't have such deep thoughts as Eddie Brooke. Are you talking about this armor? Its name is Kamen Rider Demons. Of course, I call it Spider Rider. How is it? This name is not bad, right? Ned said proudly. It was as if he was the one on the field. Not bad, not bad. Eddie Brooke smiled. I didn't think of it. This fellow was referring to his nickname. Then let's call him Spider Rider. Eddie Brooke, who was hiding in the two cars, immediately explained. And at this time, the number of spectators after Spider-Man went on stage. The number of people in the live broadcast room became lively after Spider-Man went on stage. It also became lively. Spider Rider, a good name. Come on, Spider Rider. Come on, let these guys have a look. Yes, Spider Rider, my superhero. And just as Spider Rider, Peter Parker, finished beating the leopard Amazon, a figure like a meteor streaked across the distance. Not someone else. It was our Iron Man, Tony Stark. But he was not in a hurry to join the battlefield. Instead, he hovered in the air and scanned the area. Jarvis, help me determine the number of people on the field. Tony immediately said. Yes, sir. Jarvis immediately scanned the area. In an instant, he had a basic judgment of the situation in the field. After the test, there are 103 of them here. The number of people who were injured at the scene is 134. There are 852 people who can be saved. After listening to Jarvis' report, Tony nodded. Fortunately, it's not too late. Tony concluded. Right. What is that spider-like man in the field? Jarvis was connected to the internet. After searching for a while, he did not obtain any useful information. He only knew that it was called Spider Rider. It was also an existence that came to help. Since that's the case, let's move out as well. As he spoke, he suddenly descended. Bang! It landed heavily on the ground. And this move, it immediately alarmed the two Amazon bees that were looking for food nearby. When they heard the noise, they immediately looked up. They saw Iron Man Tony fall from the sky. Perhaps it was to protect the food. Or perhaps it was to change the taste. The two Amazon looked at each other. They then pounced toward Iron Man. And in the meantime, two hard stingers suddenly attacked Iron Man. But two metal colliding sounds could be heard. These two stingers were only on the surface of Iron Man. They left a shallow scratch on his body. As for Tony, he also raised his hands. In his palm, light surged. In the next second, boom! Two light bullets shot out from his palm. In just a single moment, the heads of the two Amazon directly exploded. Blood splattered everywhere. His brain was splattered all over the ground. The two Amazon fell straight to the ground. The entire process, clean and precise. The battle was extremely fast. It's Iron Man. And the survivors next to him. They also recognized Tony. They immediately cheered loudly. After all, Tony's reputation was much greater than that of the recently debuted Spider Rider. Everyone, don't worry. Next, I will protect your safety. Tony, who was in the armor, waved his hand at the lucky survivors around him. And at this time, Eddie Brooke also moved the camera to Iron Man's position. Heavens! Is Iron Man here too? Now, there is hope. I have to say, this Iron Man's armor is similar to the Spider Rider. How about we call him Iron Man in the future and call him Iron Rider? The audience in the live broadcast room immediately began to discuss. At the scene, after two superheroes arrived, whether it was the survivors present or the audience in the live streaming room, the emotions in their hearts couldn't help but surge. On the other side, Spider-Man. After killing the other Amazon, they also found this Iron Man. Oh! I didn't expect it. Iron Man actually came as well. Parker looked a little surprised. Chapter 142, Enemy from Above. He immediately used a spider web. He arrived next to Iron Man. Hey! Hello! Later, after the battle is over. Can you help me sign my name later? Parker asked. I have a friend who is your fan. He pointed at Ned, who was outside, and explained. Although he was a fan of Hiden Intelligence. But in fact, before Hiden Intelligence had risen to prominence, he also liked Iron Man very much. However, following the rise of Hiden, he gradually changed his faith. Iron Man Tony heard the voice of a youth in the armor opposite him. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised. But immediately after, he encouraged. Well done, kid. Don't worry. After the battle is over, I will treat you to a meal," he immediately said. After all, not everyone had the guts to go to this place. And at this time, some of the Amazon in the surroundings saw such a big commotion. They immediately stopped eating and bared their fangs and claws as they surrounded this place. They swore to eat these two fellows who had disturbed them. For a moment, this Iron Man and Spider-Man Parker were surrounded by layers of encirclement. The two of them faced each other. Outside, on the other hand, there were dozens of different shapes and sizes of Amazon. "How is it? Are you afraid?" Tony asked with a smile as he looked at the incoming Amazon. "Of course I'm not afraid," Parker replied in a heroic manner. "All right. Then let's kill all of these guys." Tony rose into the air. He immediately rushed towards Amazon. The light bombs in his hands were like raindrops. They flew towards the group of Amazon. Bang! 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 In a split second, some of Amazon was blown up. And Peter Parker did not show any weakness. He waved his fist. Then, he charged toward the nearest poisonous snake Amazon. The spider silk shot out at the same time. Then, fists and feet collided. This snakeskin monster didn't even have the time to react. It was knocked down to the ground by Parker. It was truly a tragic sight. The Amazon who was in front of him also followed. In an instant, there was the sound of wailing ghosts and howling of wolves. Seeing this situation, for a moment, the crowd was boiling. Whether it was on the scene or on the internet, everyone could not help but cheer. "Great, Spider Rider! Iron Man, do your best!" From the looks of it, it seemed like it was only a matter of time before the Amazon on the scene will be eliminated. On the other side, Hild's fighter jet had just arrived at the scene. He couldn't help it because of the invisible material. Therefore, no one discovered it for the time being. The hatch slowly opened. Hawkeye looked at the situation outside and couldn't help but frown. Outside, it seemed like they didn't need their help. Those two Kamen Riders seemed to have done quite well. In that case, then he would complete the task of the director first. Thinking of this, Hawkeye jumped off the plane without hesitation. Then he rolled forward and landed on a building around him. Then, he raised his bow and shot toward a place at the bottom of Osborne Building. The bow and arrow dragged the rope and instantly tightened. As for Hawkeye, he used it to slide down from the top of the building. He easily arrived in front of Osborne's door. At this time, most of Amazon had already been released. As a result, the interior of Osborne's building was empty. This Hawkeye was hiding in the darkness. He then moved inside, while the Eagle Eye was sneaking into Osborne's building. However, the appearance of the outside world changed. He saw Iron Man patrolling in the middle of the air. His palm had fired too many light bullets. It was already slightly hot. He extinguished the beam and prepared to cool down for a while. However, right at this moment, a black figure suddenly appeared behind him. He aimed at Iron Man's Jr. and ruthlessly kicked him. There was a loud bang. Iron Man Tony couldn't dodge in time. He fell straight down from the sky. He fell to the ground and rolled several times in a row. In a split second, sparks flew everywhere. The paint on the surface of the steel armor had been wiped off. "Who is it?" Tony rolled a few times. Only then did he stabilize himself. He hurriedly got up from the ground and said angrily. He actually dared to disturb him. And at this time, in the sky, a pitch-black bat Amazon was flapping its wings. He looked down at Iron Man from above. His eyes were filled with ridicule. Iron Man Tony naturally could not tolerate it. He immediately raised his hand, wanting to shoot him down. Who knew that right at this moment? This black bat Amazon immediately opened its mouth. Ang! A terrifying sound wave was immediately released from its mouth. Chapter 143, Pushed into the corner. The crowd below immediately blocked their ears. And the one who suffered the most from the sound waves, without a doubt, it was Iron Man below. The screen in front of him was shaking crazily. Zi la la. Wall Earth 51 equals 1, 51 equals 1. Armor is being attacked by a super sound wave. Please escape as soon as possible. Jarvis hurriedly reminded. Damn it. Tony did not dare to be negligent. This armor of his could withstand physical attacks such as bullets and claws. However, it was unable to resist an existence like sound waves. If this continued, his 02 suit might be scrapped. Thinking of this, Tony rolled and crawled as he quickly flew into the distance. As for the bat Amazon in the sky, he was naturally not to be outdone. He flapped his wings and instantly caught up. On the other side, Parker's situation was not much better. Due to the previous battle, it was too smooth. This also caused Parker to inevitably underestimate his opponent. Hence, he acted even more boldly. Not long after, he saw Amazon eating alone in a corner. This guy was several levels bigger than the other guys from before. He had his back facing Parker as he ate something. Parker saw this. Without another word, another spider silk shot out. This spider silk immediately tied up this big guy Amazon. Be obedient and surrender. Parker swung his spider silk and flew towards this big guy, Amazon. Who knew that at this moment, this guy suddenly turned his head. His entire body was dark, and his skin was extremely rough. On his neck, there was a ferocious black elephant head. This was the elephant Amazon. Its level far exceeded the average Amazon, reaching A class. They were the first few existences to complete the experiment. At this time, he was holding a person in his hand. That slender elephant nose was like a conduit, inserted into the guy's brain bag. He was sucking the brain matter. The entire scene was extremely cruel. Facing Parker's provocation, this elephant Amazon only gave him a cold look. Immediately, his entire body suddenly exerted force. "Si la la." The snow-white spider silk binding him suddenly broke apart. It fell to the ground. What? When Parker saw this, he could not help but turn pale with fright. One had to know. Just now, he had made a simple judgment. The spider silk that it shot out was extremely sturdy. It was extremely difficult to break free. According to the conversion of strength, it required at least a dozen tons of strength to pull it apart. However, the elephant in front of him, Amazon, instantly tore it apart. It could be seen just how terrifying the power was. And at this moment, facing Parker's attack, he raised his fist. Parker braced himself and launched an attack. He raised the demon seal in his hand and immediately launched an attack. Boom! 8 spider legs appeared behind him. The 8-legged spider contracted at the same time. It appeared beneath his feet. His entire body moved in the speed of light. He kicked at the elephant Amazon. His fists and feet suddenly collided together. Boom! The ground below cracked open. The elephant Amazon's arm exploded. Parker was also sent flying. He crashed into a pile of ruins. Not only that, the spider seal on his waist also fiercely fell out. It fell into a group of Amazon. He wanted to find it again. But it was not so convenient. Following Parker's fall, Iron Man, who was in the sky, raised their hands. It wasn't good either. Without hesitation, he shot out a beam of light. He attacked the bat Amazon who was chasing behind him. Who knew that this guy seemed to be prepared? He raised his bat wings. When he was about to block it, the light bomb was immediately dissipated into nothingness. Damn it! Seeing this, Tony could not help but grit his teeth. Facing this bat Amazon, he didn't know what to do. He could only try his best to dodge. And it was impossible to carry out an effective attack. For a moment, once again, they were caught in a stalemate. Hey, Parker! On the other side, Parker was defeated. Ned, who was hiding behind, couldn't sit still. As his good brother, he naturally wouldn't ignore this matter. This fellow immediately prepared to charge forward. He handed the devil seal in the box to Parker. "Ha, you don't want to live anymore." Eddie Brooke tried his best to stop him. But, however, he still couldn't stop Ned. One of the cars stopped him from going over 2 cars and then rushed towards Parker. Ned originally thought his movements were very agile. However, he did not expect this. This chubby appearance of his. In the eyes of other Amazon, this was simply a walking meal. The elephant Amazon saw Ned at a glance. His eyes exploded with greed. Chapter 144, The AIMS Guard Problem. Just as he was about to approach Parker, the elephant Amazon suddenly appeared behind him. His arm had already recovered to its original state. It looked like he had not suffered any injuries. Facing the 2 people in front of him, it grinned. Its nose suddenly extended. It grabbed Ned by the neck. Ned was wrapped around his neck, and the box in his hand immediately fell to the ground. Kaka. The devil seal on the inside immediately fell out. Ned. Parker saw this and immediately wanted to get up. He didn't want this uncle's matter to happen again. Who knew that Elephant Amazon wasn't stupid? He raised his foot and stepped on Parker. He couldn't move at all. The Elephant Amazon looked at Parker with a sneer. Then, he was ready to enjoy his delicious food. Parker. At this time, Ned, who had been lifted by the elephant's nose, had his face flushed red. He seemed to be on the verge of death. The Elephant Amazon's nose suddenly pierced towards his temple. He wanted to suck his brain. No. Parker, who was being stepped on, struggled with all his might. He wanted to rescue his good friend. However, he was ruthlessly stepped on by the elephant leg. Damn it! Eddie, who was hiding at the side, was extremely angry when he saw this situation. However, he did not dare to rush out. He could only hammer the car beside him. And the audience in the live broadcast room. At this time, they couldn't help but breathe. They covered their mouths. They did not want to see such a cruel scene. However, at this moment, a gorgeous bullet suddenly streaked out. Whoosh! It tore through the sky. It suddenly shot towards the Elephant Amazon. However, faced with the incoming bullets, the Elephant Amazon appeared extremely disdainful. One must know. With the strength of his body, this was nothing. Not to mention a mere bullet. Even a cannonball might not be able to harm his body. Therefore, this Elephant Amazon didn't care in the slightest. He raised his elephant nose and prepared to stab it into Ned's temple. He started to suck it up. Who knew? In the next second, there was a bang. The elephant's nose broke from the root. Ned suddenly fell from the sky. He hurriedly raised his hand and pulled the elephant's nose off his neck. Then, he took in large mouthfuls of fresh air. As for the Elephant Amazon, he was stunned for a moment. It immediately released waves of miserable cries. One had to know. The root of this nose was the most vivid part of its body. Now, it exploded. One could imagine how painful it was. This guy raised his hands and covered his nose. His body involuntarily took a few steps back. As for Parker, he took this rare opportunity. With a roll, he immediately got up from the ground. He blocked Ned behind him. Then, he picked up a seal from the ground. And at this time, the bullet that pierced Amazon's elephant nose did not continue to fly far away. Instead, it circled in the air. Then, it returned the same way it came. It shot toward the direction of the bullet. Everyone present immediately followed the trajectory of the bullet and looked behind. At this moment, a group of people was walking over from the darkness on the street behind them. They were armed to the teeth and had special bullets on their bodies. Their eyes flashed with a cold light. Their movements were very neat, just like an army. It was no one else. It was the Ames guards of Hiden Intelligence. In fact, because of the incitement of Norman Osborn, this caused the reputation of Hiden Intelligence and Ames to be greatly affected. Many people saw the report again. They couldn't help but have some doubts about Ames's guards. And before, some of the gangs were wiped out by the Ames guard. He also jumped out at this time. He accused Ames's guards of human discrimination. For a time, IMSS guards became an existence everyone wanted to beat up. As long as they went on the streets, they would be greeted by some people and even throw rotten eggs at them. So, out of helplessness, this chief officer George had no choice but to suspend the law enforcement rights of Ames's guards. However, they stayed in the police station and rested for a while. They were not allowed to participate in the operation to encircle and annihilate Amazon. This made Fuwasamu, who was in the police force, extremely stifled. One had to know. He was an existence that had awakened the singularity of technology. His thoughts were no different from that of a human. He had suffered such a great grievance. This guy, in the police station, could be said to be full of anger. So, after receiving Levi's order, he immediately led the Ames guards out. They arrived at the scene as fast as they could. Firstly, it was to use this operation to improve their image among the people. Secondly, it was to use these Amazon to vent the accumulated anger in his heart. At this moment, after seeing Ames's guards, some of the people present immediately revealed a trace of guilt on their faces. Chapter 145, nanomachine and spatial compression. Before this, most of them were still biased against Ames. But now, a crisis had arrived. This Ames guards, however, still did not care about the past. All of them rushed over. This immediately moved everyone. And in the live broadcast room, many people expressed their apologies. And the arrival of them, it naturally attracted some of Amazon's attention. They raised their heads one after another, looking at this group of uninvited guests in front of him. However, from their point of view, this was not enough for another group of people who had come to die. Looking at these guys, each and every one of them was tall and strong. Compared to the taste, it must be more delicious than those guys from before. And so, some of them put down the food in their hands. They turned to attack Ames's guards. Among them, one of the Locust's Amazon was extremely eye-catching. His forelimbs landed on the ground, and then he used his strength. Shua! His entire body charged forward. The ground cracked from the stomp. In just an instant, it charged forward dozens of meters. The speed of the impact was incomparably fierce. In less than a moment, this fellow, carrying a terrifying might, arrived in front of Ames's guards. At this time, it leaped up once more. He charged towards Isamu, who was at the very front. He prepared to pounce on him and then bite him. The ape's mouth that was full of ape teeth looked extremely ferocious. However, facing such a threat, Isamu did not have the slightest bit of fear. He raised his fist and waved it towards this fellow. Go to hell! He roared loudly. Ridiculous! With just fists? You want to fight against me? Seeing this, the Amazon on the other side could not help but sneer in his heart. As for everyone present, after they saw this scene, they were stunned. They could not help but turn their heads. He didn't want to see Isamu being bitten after that. After all, no one was able to believe that this Isamu only relied on his fists. He was able to defeat this Amazon. And just at this critical moment, the bullet that was shot out just now had already flown back. However, the direction was different. It was aimed at Isamu's heart. This guy. Do you want to commit suicide? And at this time, Iron Man who was in the sky saw this scene. He couldn't help but complain. However, in the next second, he was speechless. He saw the bullet. When he was 2 or 3 meters away from Isamu, it suddenly exploded. Soon after, it turned into countless armor parts. It covered Isamu's body. Catching! In an instant, a dark blue Kamen Rider completed their transformation in an instant. Ci la la! Along with a burst of steam, Kamen Rider Vulcan Assault Wolf's form immediately took shape. The entire process took less than a second. It was extremely fast. He was extremely cool. What? How is this possible? Iron Man, who was in the sky, couldn't help but open his mouth when he saw this. His eyes widened. He simply couldn't believe it. This guy used a bullet to complete the transformation in an instant. This. How many technical difficulties should it involve? Nanofold. Spatial compression. Damn it. How did this guy get here? Tony couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. He had originally thought that, after he revealed the armor he was wearing, it had already far surpassed Hiden Intelligence. Unexpectedly, he had already simplified his armor to such an extent. This Hiden Intelligence, in a situation where he was unprepared, once again, it brought a technical impact to Iron Man. Damn it! Was this Hiden Intelligence's technology? No. After he went back, he had to make this armor of his. And at this time, Isamu, who was in the field, did not have any reaction. This was already the number of times he did not know how many times Henshin had done it. The entire process was very simplified. There were no fancy movements. It was just the anger in his heart. The blue fist carried a terrifying shadow. Suddenly, it smashed into the face of Amazon, who was pouncing towards him. A crack sound was heard. The sound of bones breaking rang out. Terrifying power. In an instant, the bones in Amazon's head were completely broken apart. His face was instantly deformed. However, this was not the end. The huge impact caused his body to be sent flying. It crashed heavily into the wall. Boom! Rocks flew everywhere. Because the power was too great, Chapter 146, Peter's New Power. This fellow's body was actually directly embedded into the wall. His body twitched. He was stuck in it, unable to move. This was the power of Kamen Rider Vulcan. The moment this Fuwasamu appeared, he attracted the attention of everyone present. The audience in the live broadcast room also exploded. I didn't expect that this Hiden Intelligence also has the technology of Kamen Rider armor. That's right. Although Iron Man is the first to develop this Rider armor. But in terms of how cool it is, it should be Hiden Intelligence. That's right, Hiden Intelligence. For a moment, the audience commented on Hiden Intelligence. It instantly rose up. At this time, Parker, who was facing him, also saw this scene. Too powerful. Is this Hiden Intelligence's technology? Even if it was me, I'm afraid I would not be able to block this attack. He thought to himself. However, at this moment, the elephant Amazon on the other side let out a roar. His eyes, due to the stinging pain, it had become extremely scarlet. He looked at Parker and Ned. It was full of appetite. One had to know. This Amazon had an extremely strong recovery ability. However, this recovery ability required the support of protein. Just now, he had a full meal. Therefore, after his right arm exploded, he quickly recovered. However, he also used up all the protein in his body. Now, he urgently needed to eat. These two fellows in front of him were his best supplements. Thinking of this elephant Amazon no longer hesitated. After losing its elephant nose, it still had other methods of attack. As for Parker, who was facing him, naturally, he noticed it as well. Looks like I have to use this new devil seal. Parker did not hesitate. He immediately pressed the demon seal in his hand. This time, the demon seal was the rat seal. After pressing it, immediately, a burst of green light burst out. Immediately after, Parker placed it on his waist belt. The electronic sound effect immediately sounded. Add. Dominate up. Then, Parker hung the devil seal to the side. Then, he suddenly stretched out his hand. Because he could feel it. It was as if something was about to emerge from it. Mogura, Genomics. On his right arm, the red sticky substance squirmed. It was as if Venom's son was about to be slaughtered. Bursts of red light accompanied it. It continued to condense. Ultimately, it formed a green drill that looked like a crystal. Parker lightly shook his hand. "Ci la la." The diamond on his arm started to shake rapidly. It was extremely cool. This was the ability brought about by the rat demon seal. Drill. Just in time. Parker said cheerfully. This was because the elephant in front of him had extremely strong defense. Normal attacks. They were completely ineffective against him. Just now, he had used all his strength to attack. It had only just injured his arm. But now, if it was this drill, there was no need to be afraid. Parker immediately rushed forward as well. As for the elephant Amazon, he raised his hand. He swung his hammer down. However, Parker immediately raised the diamond head in his hand. Block. Wang. 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 The drill in his hand spun rapidly. He blocked upwards. Ci la la. Not a moment later, his arm became a bloody mess. Ah! This elephant Amazon was so in pain that he took a few steps back. Since that was the case, then it could only use this move. It crouched on the ground. Two terrifying tusks immediately grew out. It hissed. It roared as it charged towards Parker. However, in the face of this elephant Amazon's head-on collision, Parker did not choose to fight head-on. He immediately raised the ominous drill in his hand and drilled its head. It drilled into the ground. Ci la la. It was accompanied by a green whirlwind. It instantly disappeared from where it was. The elephant Amazon instantly lost its target. For a moment, he actually didn't know where to go. He could only stare with red eyes and breathe out white gas. However, the next second, Parker emerged from behind him. He leaped into the sky. Next is the time of the end. Die. Chapter 147, Lightning Hornet, Descent. Parker once again pressed on his belt. Along with the sound effects, the seal in his hand immediately changed directions. It came to his feet. Ci la la. The drill drilled crazily. It brought along an unparalleled cyclone as it swept downwards. And that elephant Amazon was like a huge target at this moment. He stood there. There was no room for resistance. Final vortex. Parker was like a green whirlwind. It suddenly drilled towards the elephant Amazon. With a swoosh. Then, it passed by the elephant Amazon. Then, it landed on the ground. Immediately. He raised his hand and touched the horn on his head. That appearance. It looked like Sentu of Kamen Rider build. On the other hand, the elephant Amazon stood still on the spot. Immediately after. His entire body exploded. Boom. It exploded into pieces. Oh. That's too powerful. And at this time. Ned, who was hiding at the side, saw this and immediately ran out. He hugged Parker and shook him. And on the other side. Isamu and the others also began their battles. Isamu took the lead. He immediately charged out. As for the other AIMS members, they also began to spread out. They were chasing after the lone Amazon. The bullets in their hands were special items. The bullets they fired were specifically used to counter Amazon. Some of Amazon were instantly beaten. Damn it! They covered their injured bodies and gradually retreated. It just so happened that they saw Yua commanding behind them. Although these Amazon had undergone a mutation, they did not lose their wisdom. This woman was the commander of this team. If they caught her, then wouldn't the danger be eliminated? Thinking of this, these Amazon glanced at each other. They instantly charged towards Yua. Be careful! And at this time, Eddie, who was hiding at the side, couldn't help but remind her. His camera angle. It also shone towards that direction. However, she saw several Amazon rushing towards her. Yua did not panic at all. Facing the camera, she did not dodge at all. Because at this time, the president gave her two tasks. The first was to lead AIMS as guards. Annihilate these Amazons that runs wildly. Secondly, she had to try her best to show off a transformation scene. This was to show Hiden's rider technique. Originally, they planned to bring a photographer with them. However, they did not expect that. There was a proper reporter and cameraman at the scene. Then, there was no need for trouble. Suddenly, there are many Amazon rushing over from all directions. Then, let's begin. Shot riser. As she spoke, the blue AIMS shot riser was already worn around her waist. Immediately after, Sister Yua raised her hand. A yellow program with the profile of a was printed on the front and it materialized in her hand. Then it was held in her hand. Thunder. She spun the item around her hand. Authorize. Kamen Rider. Kamen Rider. It was accompanied by AIMS Shatricer's standby tone. Sister Yua also directly opened the program panel in the transformation device as much as possible. Then, she stretched her right hand and grabbed AIMS shot riser by her waist. She placed his index finger on the trigger. Henshin! She shouted. Shot rise! She pulled the trigger. With a bang, a golden bullet immediately broke through the chain. It circled around Sister Yua's body and suddenly spun a few times. The sharp sound of glass breaking sounds through the air. It immediately caused those Amazon who had pounced over to take a few steps back in fear. Immediately after, the golden bullet smashed into Yua's shoulder. A bullet made of energy. It instantly shattered. It turned into a yellow-white armor with the characteristics of a wasp and a beehive and fell on Sister Yua. Lightning hornet. Intense white gas gushed out from the hive of the armor. Piercing needle with incredible force. It was accompanied by a gorgeous mechanical voice. Kamen Rider, Valkyrie Lightning Hornet form, has appeared. The entire scene of the transformation. It was perfectly broadcasted live. Such a silky and smooth transformation. It immediately caused everyone to exclaim in admiration. One had to know the present Kamen Rider. In fact, everyone had only seen how they appeared. Isamu's transformation was too fast. The camera was not recorded either. Therefore, this was the first time the audience had seen the transformation sequence. It was very novel. Moreover, it was the transformation of a great beauty like Yua. For a moment, her popularity was rising rapidly. In a luxurious house, the father and daughter were having dinner. Chapter 148, Idol of the Kamen Rider Scene. In the television, every channel was broadcasting Yua's transformation. Everyone actions. They immediately stopped. What is it, father? His daughter immediately asked. This man was called Pim Hank. He was the founder of Pim Technology. However, in recent years, he had retired from his position. He handed the company over to his daughter Hope to manage. Which company is this product from? Pim narrowed his eyes and asked his daughter. This Ames Guards was jointly built by the police and Hiden Intelligence. This should also be Hiden Intelligence's product. Hope immediately replied. As the head of the board of directors of Pim Technologies, she had seen Levi once at the Science and Technology Summit conference. From then on, she had a deep impression of him. Is it Hiden Intelligence? It looks like. I should find a time to go and visit. Pim seemed to have thought of something, and there was a trace of reminiscence in his eyes. And on the field, Yua, who had completed her transformation, did not stop at all. She waved her hand. Countless mechanical wasps flew out from the beehive in her armor. 90 Akazuchi was extremely hot. The female rider that everyone was cheering for. The ashamed Tony, request subscription. Wang. 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 These mechanical bees flapped their wings. It was like a missile. Suddenly, they flew towards the Amazons. These Amazon were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. They wanted to swat these mechanical bees away. However, the agility of the mechanical bees was beyond imagination. Yua raised her hand. The bees seemed to be on her command. They all avoided the fatal attacks. Instead, they moved toward the fatal parts of the Amazons. Then, with a snap of Yua's fingers. Boom! 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 A series of explosions sounded. For a moment, flames splashed in all directions. Those Amazon were directly blown to the point that black smoke appeared on their faces. They fell down straight on the ground. On Yua's side, it seemed as if she hadn't moved at all. She was displaying her full prowess. She's really too cool. Heavens, I feel like I've been captured by this female rider. That's right, me too. This move is really too cool. When the audience in the live streaming room saw this scene, they couldn't help but praise it. There was no way. Yua's action was really too gorgeous. On those who were watching, there were very few people who were not attracted by her. Even Eddie Brooke, who was watching from the side, could not help but cheer when he saw this scene. He also could not help but cheer loudly. On the other side, Ned. He had already put down Parker. He turned to look at Yua in a daze. He was still muttering. Hey, Parker. After the battle is over, can you help me get an autograph? Parker raised his hand and covered his face. But speaking of which, he really should go up and thank the people. After all, the last time, it was her that saved him from dying miserably at the hands of the cheetah Amazon. And just as everyone was sighing with emotion, the life of another superhero was not easy. Before everyone could appreciate Yua's cool appearance. At this moment, a figure suddenly fell from the sky. With a clang, it fell in front of Yua. It seemed to be in a sorry state. And this guy was no one else. It was the Iron Man, Tony Stark. At this moment, when he raised his head, he saw Sister Yua in front of him. He was instantly incomparably embarrassed. Just a moment ago, he was lacking in electricity. As a result, his flying speed became slightly slower. In the end, the Bat Amazon kicked him again. He kicked him down from the sky again. The first time, it could be said that he was careless. But the second time, he was hit by the same move. This was skill issue. And coincidentally, it rolled in front of Hiden Intelligence's employee. This time, he had lost all face. And at this time, the Bat Amazon in the sky had already caught up. His sinister face was clearly visible. Let me help you deal with it. Yua looked at Iron Man's face on the ground and immediately said. As she spoke, two blue wings of insects suddenly spread out from behind her. Buzz. A high frequency like that of a wasp sounded. Not only did it bring an ear-piercing buzzing sound, it also inherited the powerful flying force of the wasp. In the next moment, Yua opened her hands, and her body suddenly flew high into the sky. The eyes of the Bat Amazon on the other side immediately turned red. She turned around and let go of Tony. He turned around and pounced toward Sister Yua. Good timing. Increase the DPS rate to the maximum. Sister Yua said calmly. She stretched out her hand. Her body immediately released a burst of light. Immediately after, countless mechanical bees flew out from her body. Like a swarm of locusts, they flew towards the Bat Amazon. He faced the swarm of bees. The Bat Amazon laughed coldly. She once again shoot out his unique weapon sound wave attack. Chapter 149, Osborne Grand Scheme. He opened his mouth. A terrifying sound wave rang out from his mouth. It collided with the swarm of bees that had rushed over. In an instant, it exploded. And this explosion caused a chain reaction. Fire and smoke filled the sky. The sound was deafening. The vision of both sides was instantly blocked. At this time, Sister Yua only smiled coldly. Just now, it was just a smoke bomb. Now, she was starting to get serious. She pressed the button in the Projirisekis. Then, she pulled Ames Shatricer's trigger. Thunder. Lightning blast ever. Her yellow and white body stretched out in mid-air. Her entire body flashed with a blue lightning. Immediately, this blue lightning gathered towards her legs. Ci la la. As the lightning hornet Projiriseki's energy continued to flow into her right foot. Then, it gathered into a sharp stinger made of energy on her right foot. Immediately, the wings behind her flapped. Her entire body was like a sharp sword that had left the bow. It carried blue lightning as it shot out with a loud bang. Whoosh! She instantly passed through the smoke. She passed through the Bat Amazon's chest. This fellow's voice stopped abruptly. It lowered its head. He saw a huge hole in his chest. It suddenly realized. And within it, lightning flickered. No. It widened its scarlet eyes, its face filled with fear. As for Sister Yua, she directly landed on the ground. With a backflip, she used the wings of the insect behind her to steadily land on the ground. Her feet had just landed on the ground. The Bat Amazon in the sky suddenly exploded. Pieces of meat filled the sky. It was like fireworks. Sister Yua was standing on the spot. She was extraordinarily cool. After seeing this scene, the live broadcast room was instantly flooded. And Tony's face. It became even more unsightly. The fellow that he could not deal with was easily dealt with by the other party. Didn't this mean that Stark Industry was inferior to Hiden Intelligence? He had to get his revenge. And just as everyone was cheering, just when they thought that victory was imminent, the screen in front of Osborne Building suddenly turned on. On it, a video was displayed. In the video, Norman Osborn's face was cold. At this moment, he was not as gentle as usual. Instead, he seemed very crazy. Those green eyes were especially eye-catching. Everyone. It seems that you did a good job. To defeat hundreds of experimental subjects who were made by me. They are quite strong. He opened his hands and muttered to himself. It looked like the clown in a Batman movie. Seeing Osborne on the big screen, everyone present gritted their teeth in hatred. If not for this guy and his crazy experiments, creating bunch of man-eating monsters, the scene wouldn't have become like this. I thought. This was such a mess. If the people outside were all Kamen Rider, this guy would definitely hide. Unexpectedly, he actually dared to jump out. Instantly, this Norman Osborne received many cordial greetings. I seem to have heard everyone's congratulations. And on the screen, Osborne faced the crowd's curses. Not only did he not get angry, he even placed his hand beside his ear and listened attentively. It could be said that he was very good at pulling and mocking. This guy, what is he trying to do? Parker raised his head and looked at the big screen. He looked a little puzzled. Iron Man and Tony were also confused. However, he still took advantage of this rare opportunity. He changed the reaction of the arc on his body. I believe that just now, everyone should have seen how powerful that Amazon is, right? Whether it is speed or strength, they are far superior to humans. And at this time, on the screen, Osborne seemed to have a little more desire to perform. He put his hands behind his back, paced around, and began to slowly tell the story. As a scientist, in my life, I have been dedicated to the human body strengthening plan. But gradually, I found that humans are too weak to use the enhancement. They are weak, powerless, and cowardly. In that case, then why do we still need to be human? That Norman Osborne suddenly turned around. His face also became more and more ferocious. For this, I specially made this kind of device. Osborn turned around. He saw a liquefied device appear behind him. This thing is called the Canary device. Just add the serum to it. Very soon, the reaction clouds it creates can cover the entire New York. As he spoke, Norman stuffed a large bottle of Amazon solvent into the Canary device. The Canary device is starting to work. Countdown, 2 minutes. The device immediately issued a prompt. Chapter 150, Tony and Peter attacks the Osborn Tower. It's the time. Time for a new path of human evolution. Norman Osborn was installing Amazon's solvent. He smiled and turned around. This is my gift to you. Come on. Welcome the arrival of evolution with me. Norman Osborn opened his arms and opened his mouth. He announced excitedly. However, when he finished talking about his plan, the people below immediately fell into silence. Immediately after, a series of screams rang out. Until this moment, only then did everyone understand what this Norman Osborn meant. He wanted to transform the entire New York into Amazon. Madman. This guy is simply a madman. He actually wants the entire 8 million people of New York to be buried with him. Who can stop him? I don't want to become a monster like Amazon. For a moment, all the citizens of New York fell into panic. Big Street. The cars were in a mess. Everyone wanted to escape into the distance. In the hospital, the doctors and nurses were also evacuating urgently. In the ward, Aunt May held Uncle Ben's hand, who was lying on the bed. Her face was full of fear. In the university classroom, Harry Osborn stared at the TV with his mouth wide open. He simply couldn't believe it. The man on the television was actually the gentle and refined father of his usual self. An SHIELD. Nick Fury saw Osborn's announcement and was so angry that he slammed the table. He had not expected this. This Norman Osborn was currently executing such an evil plan. If Norman Osborn's plan succeeded, then, the entire New York would fall. It turned into Amazon's breeding ground. However, this was not the most terrifying. One had to know. This Amazon was man-made. Once all of New York's residents turned into Amazon, then, the residents of the other continents in America, wouldn't they all become food for New York's people? At that time, the entire US would fall into an unprecedented turmoil. We can't let Osborn's plan succeed. He quickly connected to Hawkeye. Let him stop it immediately. In another office of S.H.I.E.L.D., Pierce was also watching the live broadcast. However, he did not dislike Norman's plan. If he could use Amazon Cell, his body would be able to obtain more power. Then even if it was cannibalism, it was not a big deal. Moreover, Hydra, who was under his command, might be able to fish in troubled waters. He would obtain unexpected benefits. Now, let's see if this guy's plan will succeed. Pierce sat in his office chair and shook the whiskey glass in his hand. He was relaxed. And what was Hawkeye doing? This guy, ever since he took advantage of the chaos and entered Osborn Building, he first discovered the underground experimental floor. He carefully sneaked into it. He wanted to find some useful things. Who knew? After being careful for a long time, there was not even a ghost inside. There was a pile of experimental instruments. However, there was no effective record in the basement. Just as Hawkeye was about to continue searching, Nick Fury gave the order. Hawkeye was stunned. Everyone else was already planning to destroy the entire New York. As for himself, he was foolishly looking through things here. No. He was definitely going to organize this conspiracy. Thinking of this, Hawkeye immediately left the underground laboratory without looking back. He immediately prepared to go to the top floor and punish Osborn. Who knew? The elevator door to the top floor was tightly shut. He pressed several times, but the elevator did not respond at all. It turned out, the electric current in the entire building was drawn away by Osborn. They were supplying the machines on the roof. Damn it! Hawkeye hammered the elevator. There was no way. Now, if he wanted to go up, he could only take the stairs. Just like this. Hawkeye carried his quiver. He instantly climbed up the stairs. And at this time, on the ground, Tony the Iron Man had just changed into the arc reactor at his waist. In an instant, he felt that he was ready to fight again. And Spider-Man Parker also looked up. He looked at the tall Osborn building. Today, he wanted to avenge his father. Yua immediately understood what the two of them meant. Therefore, she opened her mouth and said, "Let Isamu and I handle this area. I will leave the Osborn above to the two of you." Good. Tony the Iron Man naturally would not refuse. He needed this opportunity to wash away his shame. If he could stop Osborn, perhaps he could also redeem his reputation. Parker also nodded his head. He immediately shot out the spider silk in his hand. It hung on the wall of Osborn building. Then, with a swoosh, it rose into the air and instantly disappeared. Only Ned was left in place. Wow, they are really fast. He couldn't help but open his mouth in awe. Parker borrowed the suction force of the spider silk and get off the ground.